Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years retirement community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and today we are thrilled to welcome a writer, producer, director, including directing the upcoming Space 1999 documentary, The Eagle Has Landed. Please help us welcome Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, guys. I'm honored to be here. Really excited to be here.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but to start with, you're involved in many sci-fi projects. So what is it about the genre that you love the most?
I think it's that it helps us to take a look at a future. Quite often, it's science fiction predicts, sometimes not accurately, but it certainly points the way to the future, right? And it's almost like looking at history, but doing it in reverse, looking at, forward, generating history, right? Generating concepts and ideas. I've always found that fascinating. And I think that sci-fi, in a lot of ways, drives our culture. It drives technology. A lot of people don't realize it. There are people who are like, I don't like sci-fi. Those people who don't get it, I don't think they realize how much it actually influences their lives.
Those heathens.
Yeah. So I would say that's part of what got me interested and hooked on sci-fi.
Wow. I've always been a big science fiction fan since I was very young, and I tell this story all the time, but I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey in the theater when I was 7 years old. And of course had no concept of what it was about, but my goodness, the stuff I saw just blew me away, and I was set forever, loving the genre. So your dad was an aeronautical engineer, and did that influence your sci-fi passion to a degree?
I would say for sure. I mean, he and I used to have a lot of conversations about things. He would talk about he for example, he brought home a device for me one time that had a single solar cell attached to a propeller, right? And he said, check this out. And I'm like, well, what is this? And then he started explaining to me how, solar voltaics worked, and how, and he's like, we could power things with this. We could power, we lived in Arizona, and he would talk to me about how, we've got the sun, so much sunlight, hitting this area, we could completely power it. He would talk about things like that. He would talk about maglev trains and stuff. He actually worked on a project that it didn't ever go forward, but he worked with a big engineering firm that was trying to do a maglev train that was going to cross the country. So he and I talked about that sort of thing. He brought home models for me quite often, like the X-15 rocket plane. It was something we built when I was a kid. And I think the coolest thing he ever did, he gave me a poster of the space shuttle 10 years before it launched. It was a concept art. And he said, this is something NASA's planning to do. And I was like, what? I was like, that's like an airplane. It's an airplane attached to a rocket. I was like, that's so cool, So that was, that was the kind of stuff my father did that really sparked my imagination.
You knew about the space shuttle before it became
Yeah, I knew about the space shuttle, and I went to the school, and I actually brought the poster to school, and I was like showing my friends, like, check this out. It's like it's a space plane, and everything. So that certainly was inspirational. No question. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, what were some of your influences, like as far as films or shows in sci-fi, for yourself?
Well, I would say, like Ike, I saw 2001. I think 2001 probably more than anything as a young person, as a child, impacted me. Now I didn't see it until it was like shown on television, like I think it had its world premiere on NBC at one point or something. I watched that, right? But it was just the idea of seeing this tour of the future. This journey, when especially when you follow Dr. Floyd up to the space station, and then you're in there, and they got the Howard Johnsons in there and all this. I'm like, whoa, this is like so cool. And then going, calling his daughter on that visual phone, right? And then traveling to the moon and all the stuff. That was like, man, okay, so you think about that number, 2001, that year, I'm like, okay, Star Trek is like way out in the future. This is 2001, I could grow up to be part of that. I could be, that's the future that we're all heading toward, right? So I would say 2001 probably more than anything really impacted me. I watched the original Star Trek a lot as a child. I loved that. Movies like Silent Running. I'm just trying to think of different things I was always like into the harder sci-fi stuff, the stuff that seemed like it could happen, and as opposed to the fantasy stuff. So when I saw Star Wars, I thought it was cool, but it was a little too fantasy for me as a kid, so I know that may be different than a lot of other kids, but but I had that kind of interest.
That's awesome.
No, it's so interesting because you and I have almost exactly the same sort of attraction to science fiction. I like the realistic stuff. I think that's why 2001 just blew my mind, because it looked so real, and it still does.
It still does.
It's one of the few like hardcore science, futuristic movies that just the design holds up. It's never kind of shown its age, and in a lot of ways it's probably one of them. I think I was just going to ask you this question other than making my own comment about it, but it's also on my mind one of the most it predicted so many things that we do have now. And that's the thing that just still floors me. I mean, the idea of a video phone was like, you figure back in 1965 when this thing was shot,
right?
Of course there were fantasies about that, but now you like you said, you see it there, and now we have them.
We're doing it. We're doing it.
Yeah, it's all.
We're literally doing it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, you're right. Of course,
right. We're doing it right now. This is 2000. We're doing it.
But oh, good grief. All right, hang on. I'm sorry. Hang on. My headset just went south on me yet again. We
were just talking about your
AirPod connection here.
No problem.
But anyway, getting back to you, which this is all about, your earliest works that you started with were works on Super 8. Do you remember what they were about?
Yeah, actually. Okay, so I was really inspired. So in the early 80s, there was a movie called Firefox that came out, right? And actually, I think starred Clint Eastwood, right?
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I got a model of the MiG-31 right here behind me, right? Cool. Okay, it's and that movie was so cool to me, the chase sequences and stuff. I decided to try to recreate my own version of that. So my first big little Super 8 project was recreating a dogfight between F-16s and a paper airplane. So I had all these, like, I used fishing line and stuff and everything, and we had this, like, we rented this beehive fogger that we could create smoke with, and we used that as clouds. And so my cousin and I made this movie. That was one of the first Super 8 projects that we did, was trying to. And so we had this paper airplane having this dogfight. We did it's cheesy, and like 8th graders made it, but it was pretty cool. And everything. So that was one of my first little things I did, and I always tried to dabble with visual effects and playing around with speeding up, like a time lapse and stuff, or trying to, where you would take a few frames every second, and I'd like run through my neighborhood and take a couple frames at a time, and then when you get the film back, it looked like you were going super speed, through things, stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that I used to play around with back then, when I first started. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to veer for 1 second, because looking at your page, your bio stuff, before we get to your production stuff. So one thing just stood out among everything else, blew me away, and I have to ask about it. You choreographed for Prince?
I did. I did. Yeah, I worked with him during the Diamonds and Pearls era a little bit, and I did some choreographic work there. And he actually had a movie that he did. It was a straight to video thing called 3 Change of Gold, and I did a bunch of choreography work for that. He had a nightclub called Glam Slam that was in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, and we shot this whole big sequence there where there was dancing, and then people were fighting, and there was all this stuff. It was a really cool sequence. So that was a big one that I did. But I worked a lot with the Diamonds and Pearls stuff. There was a music video song called Get Off that we did a lot of stuff with, and that was one of my first big projects with him. So, you know, when I first decided to move to the Twin Cities after college, I really, part of why I came here was because of Prince. I was just really interested in what Prince was doing, the whole music scene, the Minneapolis sound. Then actually they had a film industry that was starting to really develop back then. It looked like it, but unfortunately they didn't nurture it enough, and it ended up, you know how Canada right now, you've got all the production started happening in Vancouver and Toronto. I really think Minneapolis could have pulled it off if they'd had better tax credits. So, because there was really that much cool stuff happening here at the time. So
how'd you get involved with him to begin with, and what was he like? I got to ask.
You know, let's see. I ended up meeting with a talent agency, and back then I had long hair and I was kind of Prince like. I kind of had the Prince sort of thing going on, you know, much to my father's disdain. But I had, you know, I had that look and feel to me and the whole thing. So I came across very much like part of that group. And I was a musician. I am a musician myself. So I kind of, it wasn't really an audition. It's like I went and sort of told these people what I was about and everything. They're like, well, Prince is in the process of developing these new, this whole thing. He's got this, they just built Paisley Park, his big studio. And so I got invited out there and they said, cool, you can be in. And then I started hanging out and I got to know people who were in this production team, and they brought me in to do stuff, which was really cool. And what was he like? It was interesting because I was never afraid of him. I was always like, you know, a lot of people were always in awe of him, but I was like, well, he's a dude. He's a guy, right? And I'm like, and he's a super talented guy, but you know, why can't I talk to him? So I just would go, hey man, and I just start talking to Prince, and people were like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I just wanted to ask him a question. So he and I started talking, and we developed a rapport. It was a crazy thing that happened. I actually was involved with developing one of his early websites. Actually, this was after I left that arena. I was doing more creative stuff later in the 90s. And I got a phone call from him, and it was crazy because someone dialed my number, and I pick up the phone at my home office, and they said, please hold for the artist. Right. And this is when he wasn't Prince. Yeah. It was like he was the artist formerly known. I was like, the artist? And I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden Prince's voice comes on the phone. He says, Jeffrey. And he starts talking, you know, something like, whoa, you know, it's, you know, so it was very cool. So he was a nice guy. I think, you know, he was quiet, and he would suddenly have these like creative outbursts, suddenly like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to do a gig tonight at 11 o'clock at my studio. And then he'd just invite 30 people suddenly and we'd be there at midnight. And then he'd play for like 3 or 4 hours. He would do things like that randomly. So those were some of the really cool experiences I had being around him. It was like, he'd just jam, like he'd just be him with a guitar and a bunch of folks hanging out, you know? So he was amazing. He was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
You eventually started creating videos for him?
I was involved with, I did some stuff for Paisley Park. So he had a dance company, and for a while. And when he did this dance company, I was in charge of doing all the videos and promotions and choreography stuff with them. That was really fun. So that was cool. So yeah, and a lot of that stuff aired on MTV and things like that. But it was neat. I actually, not only did I direct, but I shot a lot of it too. I was
fantastic
cinematography. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I want to just veer now. You, for another dream job for like a sci-fi geek, I guess, is you worked for NASA also, and created content for them. So what was that? How did that come about? And what did you do?
So I was developing film projects. So like my trajectory of my career was that, you know, I always wanted to direct features. That was my goal. But what I thought would be a better way to start it was to go into music videos first. So I was doing music videos, and then I did corporate commercials and stuff. I worked with Delta. It was used to be called Northwest Airlines, but I did a bunch of commercials and stuff. I even worked with Chuck Yeager, which was a childhood hero of mine. I got to direct Chuck Yeager in a couple commercials for Northwest, was really cool. Things like that. Anyway, during that time period, I got pulled into teaching. Some people invited me to some of the area schools to start talking to kids, and I've always been a science aficionado, tracking along with everything that I've done. I'm always studying science constantly. So so I started getting invited to talk about science as a creative person. And I was like, well, this is working. And I started getting invited to do more and more. So I launched a nonprofit organization that was about bringing science down to a level where kids could get into it through, higher level creativity, visual effects, things like that. And so what happened was I started this organization called Project Universe. And my whole idea was, I'm a big, Carl Sagan's probably my greatest hero. And I always, watching Cosmos growing up, I thought Carl Sagan's Cosmos was like the coolest thing ever. And I still do, actually. I think it was amazing. And he was really about evangelizing science, bringing science to the masses, in a lot of ways. And he actually he had scientists who were kind of critics of that they kind of thought he was dumbing it down in a way. But I think that's incredibly important. I think we have a culture that needs science literacy, we desperately, actually, especially now. So I started this organization, and I was developing projects. I developed curricula. I was working at the college level, down to high school, all the way to grade school, all these different, I work with thousands of kids. One of my projects, I wanted to pitch it to NASA, and it was something about the moon Europa, which is one of the moons that orbits Jupiter. And Europa has a subsurface ocean, and they think it's a good potential target for life, right? And I was so interested in this. And so I went to them and I pitched them Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they saw my work and they were like, hey, would you want to work for us? So I was like, yeah, and so I got invited in, and so in 1999, 2000, 2001, that's when I started working with Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Wow. And I worked with them off and on all the way till about 2010. So I was involved with the Outer Planets program. We were in the Europa missions. We were one of the early Pluto mission programs, stuff like that. So it was really fun. It was great. I got to meet, it's like meeting Prince was one thing, and I've gotten to meet some cool people that were heroes of mine, but I got to meet my real heroes when I was working with NASA, getting to meet astronauts and scientists and engineers and people who I'd grown up reading about. So that was one of the greatest experiences
one day, because I think NASA is my daughter's dream job. So I'll have to pick your brain one day.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. It was really fascinating because I met so many scientists who were frustrated because they had to get money from the American public, and the American public people were constantly saying, "Why are we spending money on this?" Right? Yeah, and so part of what I was helping them with was to find a way to reach the public and help them understand why this was so important, and so bringing this kind of music video angle and energy to NASA stuff was really a game changer. It was really fun. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, what was your the impetus for you to go off and start your own production company, Future Dude?
So I was so basically when I hit around 2010, I was like, I've had my initial career of doing the corporate music video, the documentary stuff. I did the science stuff, but deep down, I still wanted to make features. And I've always been an entrepreneur. So I thought, how can I create an organization that's kind of at the apex of all those things, right? So I've got my science interests, my creative interests, and my entrepreneurship, and bringing those all three together. So I started to launch the company in 2010. It's called Morris Future Works. And that company was all about bringing, unifying my interests to create media. And my goal was to do sci-fi stuff specifically, but hard sci-fi, really creative hard sci-fi. I was meeting so many people during my journeys that I started doing a blog about it. And I wanted to do a blog that had a kind of a cool, moniker to it. So I came up with the word future. I was doing word combinations. I was thinking about like Bill Nye the Science Guy and all these different things, right? And I was like, okay, how do I popularize science? But I don't want people to feel like it's this big lofty intellectual thing. I was like, and I'm always thinking about stuff. It's not just space, because I'm actually really into oceanography. I'm into meteorology. I'm into different types of studies, not just space. I was like, and I'm really into the future. I was like, wait a minute, future dude, future guy, future dude. And that's how I came up with the name. And then I bought the name and the domain, and I set up a blog called Future Dude. And I did that in 2012. And within, I don't know, I had like 50,000 hits on it within the first couple of months.
Wow.
And then I went to this conference in Washington, D.C. to promote this graphic novel that I had done. And I'm walking along, and this guy goes, "Hey, it's that Future Dude guy." I'm like, "What?" I was terrified. I was like, "What?" And I started realizing it was resonating. It was resonating. So by 2013, I decided to just rename the company around the blog. So I changed it to Future Dude Entertainment, and that became the name of the company. And so people seem to like it. They think it's cool and it's fun. And I'm trying to basically say to folks, it's like being into science, being in the future is actually cool. This is like, it shouldn't be something that's I feel like we have a anti-intellectual thread in our culture right now, and I think it's very dangerous. And I think that it's very important that people see being smart and being creative and forward thinking as being a positive. Does that make sense? I think that's something that's needs to be fostered. So that's part of what I'm really about and what I'm trying to do. So,
well, let's talk about your work now. I mean, so growing up, you obviously loved Space 1999. That was a time we weren't too far removed from Star Trek, and we were very close to Star Wars. So I just want to know, were you a fan of the other shows and movies from the time? And what was it about Space 1999 that stood out to you and made you love that one more than, like, I guess, some of the others?
Space 1999 for me was like, it's kind of like 2001, the TV show, if that makes sense, right? It's like 2001. There's similarities between the vehicles in 2001 and the moon base in 2001 and what you see in Space 1999, right?
Yeah.
And I always felt like when I watched Space 1999, it felt like the people who made the people making 1999, and some of them dead worked on 2001. They were like, how do we make a TV show about a moon base? And I don't know if you guys know this, but originally Jerry Anderson, when he created the concept for Space 1999, he was actually going to, first it was going to be a second season of a show called UFO that he had done, which was one of the first sci-fi shows I've ever seen. Have you guys ever seen that UFO, Jerry Anderson show?
I see, probably when I was young, I did, but I don't remember it. And I've been meaning to catch up with it again because it looks amazing.
I seriously suggest you check it out. It's honest for me. I like, my two favorite shows of all time are The Prisoner, which was made. Okay. Oh, you like?
Oh my God. I've watched The Prisoner so many times back when it was on originally on PBS, when it aired in this country, and I freaked out over it.
It's right over here next to my desk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
probably one of the only logo T-shirts other than the one I have right now that I want to get.
I spent the night a few years ago at during the 50th anniversary of that show. I spent the night at Port Marion where they filmed the show. Yeah, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And I went.
That's got to be surreal visiting that place.
I actually the hotel room that I had was inside under the Green Dome, which was number 2's residence.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It was crazy. It was crazy. It was one of the greatest things I've ever experienced. It was so cool, man.
Oh,
so cool.
Geez. So, wow.
So anyway, the other show that I really love, equally to The Prisoner, is UFO. Those are my two favorites of all time. So I would highly recommend you. I watch them. Let's
definitely will now for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, going back, I think 1999 for me. When Jerry Anderson, they said, we aren't going to make a second season of that, but we want to do another space show with you. And so he had this idea of doing a show about a moon base that was suddenly isolated and cut off from the Earth. And what he was going to do was destroy the Earth and have the moon base kind of sitting there, right? And then the producers said, the people financing it said, that's too depressing. People won't want to watch that. And so he's like, okay, fine. Well, how about we blow the moon out of orbit and have the moon fly around in space? And they're like, okay, go for that, right? Which for me is like kind of crazy, but that's fine. Even as a kid, I was like, wait a minute, the moon is doing what? But what I loved about the show was the moon base and the characters and the eagles and the science. You know what I mean? There was something about it that felt tangible and like a future that was just ahead. And you do the math and you think, man, that's 30 years from, okay, it's 25 years from now, I'll be 32 years old. Right. I'm like, I could be flying those Eagles. I could be part of that show. Right. So I think that's part of why people, at least, in this age group, dug it. It was that sort of thing. So, for me, it wasn't about the aliens and all the weird stuff. It was about the hardware and the characters and I really dug that, the foundational elements of it. So, yeah.
Well, were you also a fan of the other Jerry Anderson shows other than UFO that preceded Space 1999?
I had seen some of the Marionation stuff, like Thunderbirds and Stingray and stuff like that. I was fine with those shows. But again, like you said, being more of a hardcore guy, sci-fi guy,
right.
The seeing the live action probably resonated with me a lot more than the marionettes. You know what I mean? It's just those were cool, but I wanted to see people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It does. And I saw Thunderbirds when I was really young because I got to see it on television. And that just again cemented my love for model making and getting into that as a hobby, because that's what they weren't trying to hide that at all. They were showing you these are models, and they moved so realistically and they did so many cool things.
It's so cool. It's so creative.
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, these are up here. I've got like some of the miniatures from UFO, and they had the same kind of these miniature sets and these mobile units driving. It was so, look, it was pretty clear they were models, but it was so cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if people can understand that there was a magic to that. There's a magic to, Derek Meddings and the work those guys were doing. It was so cool.
Yeah.
So I totally appreciate it. I think it's great. Yeah.
Here, you do so many projects. So what made you decide to like tackle a documentary on the show and the Eagle?
Specifically, so one thing that's happened a couple of times, I've actually pitched ITV, who are the rights holders of Space 1999, concepts for reboots to bring it back, to do it again.
Oh, that'd be great.
And I had one version of it that I pitched them in 2018. They actually liked it, but they were iffy on how fans might react. They're very cautious about it because there's some very passionate fans in the world. They tried a reboot in 2012 and the fans didn't like the idea, and they put the kibosh on it. So twice I pitched them reboots, and they actually really, really liked some of the ideas, but they've been very cautious about what they were going to do. And I've run into so many people in the fandom of Space 1999 that I realized there's something going on, in that I'm not the only person. Like, I had this Eagle that I collected a few years ago, and then I start finding out that there are all these other people buying and building Eagles. And I started finding out the number is not just small. It's like a lot of people, like thousands and thousands of people around the world. I even read about a guy who was building one in his backyard that's 25 feet long, right? A 1/4 scale Eagle. He's building it. And I start finding out about this. I'm like, wait a minute. So I'm not alone in this. I love this design since I was a little kid. They had the Mattel version in 1976 and all the stuff, right? And I was like, these are so cool. Why do people like this so much? That was the question. It started with, why do people like this? And then I was like, well, why do I like it? Why do I have these? Why do I collect these? And I started realizing it's because it epitomizes the future we lost. Okay, that's what I think is going on with it. It's like, this was a time 50 years ago, it was pre-Star Wars. And something, I have kind of a controversial opinion that Star Wars had a really strong impact on our culture in a way. I actually wrote an article about it years ago for my blog. It's called How Star Wars Killed the Future, is the name of my article. Now, I'm not saying this is someone who hates Star Wars, because I actually like Star Wars. I especially Empire Strikes Back. I think that's a great movie. But one of the things I noticed growing up is that I watched a lot of young people lose interest, if they even had it to begin with, in real space exploration. And that shifted over to Star Wars. It's like Star Wars became like the epitome of the future to them. And I'm like, but that's a galaxy far, far away and a long time ago and all that, right? So it's not our future, and it's really a space fantasy with, fantasy elements and some technological elements, and the science isn't really there and all that, right? And I started looking at that view of Star Wars, and I started realizing that in 77, so you have this period between the Apollo program and Star Wars, and Space 1999 is kind of dead in the middle of it. And I think that people love that, the people who love the show and especially love that vehicle, if you look at the vehicle, it has elements of the NASA technology on it, right? And that's what resonated to me. You know, I could grab my lunar module and show you guys, but it's like the exact same kind of thrusters that are on the lunar module and that are on the, you know, the command module, right, of the NASA ships. Those are on the Eagle, right? And so that was something for, you know what I mean? If you studied those things and you said that's how they really got to the moon, and then you see a spaceship that travels around on the moon in a sci-fi show, you go, man, that's really what's going to happen. That's really what we're going to build, right? So I started wanting to tell that story of like people fell in love with the spaceship because I think a lot of us saw that spaceship as being the future we were going to grow up to have. And I think people have collected it and held on to it because in some ways they lost that future. It didn't come to pass. You know, it's like, who would have thought that when we, you know, the last people left the moon in 1972, that we wouldn't have gone back yet.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's a big deal. So what's happening in this documentary is the first bit is going to be about really my childhood and my love of the NASA and the Apollo program. And I'm actually going to be in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center in a couple of weeks, shooting with Charles Duke, walked on the moon in Apollo 16, and which will be great. And I'm doing an interview with him, and I'm going to talk to him about, you know, he actually wrote a book about returning to the moon years ago. We're going to talk about that. But the end of the movie is really going to be about the fact that we're going back to the moon now, and that we're really doing it, you know. And so this is going to be a journey about, you know, following me and following all the people that I know who are lovers of all this stuff. And you're going to get to see some really cool stuff. And we're even working on rebuilding the Eagle, the actual sets at Pinewood Studios. And I'm going to bring the actors back from, and have them in there. So it's going to, it's going to be a really fun project. So.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. I really can't wait to see it. The second I saw the trailer for it, I was like, oh man, I'm hooked. I'm in. That's awesome. That's great. It just looks too great.
That's great.
So an unfair question, but we have to ask, where do you rank the Eagle among the other iconic sci-fi spaceships?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna have to say the Eagle's my favorite, but it's like my second favorite has got to be the Enterprise refit from Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the rebuild of the Enterprise. I think that ship is so beautiful. It's like a work of art. And but I love a lot of ships. I mean, I love I like the Viper from Battlestar Galactica, which is right behind me. I think that's a really cool design, and
I can't take my eyes off the stuff behind you. Yes.
Yeah.
What was that, guy?
It's almost distracting.
I said I can't take my eyes off all your models there. It's like amazing.
Yeah. So I was kind of collected a bunch of the things that have been influences for me, over the years and everything. So, but yeah, I love these. I think the Eagle is probably my favorite, but the Enterprise is right behind it. I like the Millennium Falcon too. I think that's a really cool ship. I think that's a really neat. The Discovery from 2001. That's a fantastic ship. The Discovery's great. I love the pods in the Discovery. The little pods. Actually, I have a beautiful print done by this artist in Scotland that I have on my wall that was in one of the 2001 books. It's fantastic. So
how cool.
Well, I'm curious.
So I love 2001 though. I think the design work in that is just it's transcendent. It's like there's still, I don't think it's been topped. So
I have to.
You and Ike are kindred spirits.
Everybody that knows me knows that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what steps have to be taken for doing a documentary like that, and what can we expect to see within your documentary?
Let's see. What are the steps? I guess, the first thing for me has been trying to create a cohesive story, right? Like what's a compelling story? Because one thing is, I think it's very important that this story be able to resonate with people who've never even heard of Space 1999 or the Eagle. That's really important. So the hook for me is really talking about the future and what the future was like from the standpoint of people who were growing up at that time, small children, right? And a lot of us who were, say, under the age of 10, under the age of 12, in that early 1970s, that was a really unique time in human history, if you think about it, right? So that's the hook of the movie for me, is to talk about how that time period impacted so many of us and carried through to this day, and became a foundational aspect of our psychology in a way. That's a big part of it. So part of it's been building that story, and then figuring out who are the key players that I could interview or hang out with, to tell that story, right? And that's been a big part of it, right? So, so there's some interesting people that I've met. There's a guy that he actually just small town guy from Indiana, and he saw the eagle when he was a little kid. He hadn't even seen the show, but his friend of his had a model the eagle, and he's like, "What is that?" And he became obsessed with it, to the point that his friend just eventually said, "Please just take it." Right? And so he kept this obsession going. And this guy lives in Martinsville, Indiana, right in the middle of nowhere. He ended up building his name is Todd Morton, and he ended up building a fan base around this thing called Space 1999 Props and Ships. Suddenly he's got tens of thousands of people, like, from all around the world, who've come together in this forum on Facebook. And he's like, everyone started talking about, we want to see more eagles. So they ended up, through his work, they brought back a model kit of the eagle. It's made by MPC, and they've now sold over 50,000 eagles in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Right? So it went from this guy being obsessed with it as a child to now they've made 50,000 of these things, right? I think that's a really interesting story. So I just interviewed him. I was just down there in Indianapolis shooting with him. I'm going to Denmark to film the guy who's actually built that huge eagle. Wow. And everything. So it's going to be a really surprising story. The number of women that I've run into who actually collect these things, it's surprising. So wow. I'm gonna show some of that. So it's really going to be a pretty interesting story, I think. And I'm also getting to talk with the actors who are Barbara Baines agreed to be in it, who was the co-star of the series. Nick Tate, he's been who actually played Alan Carter, who flew the eagle in the show. He's going to be in it. So I've got such a great group of people. Bill George, who is a Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor from Industrial Light and Magic, he's going to be in it, and he and I should be doing a tour of ILM as part of this. So and actually the eagle actually influenced Star Wars. They tried to hire Brian Johnson, who designed the eagle and did the effects for 1999, to do the effects for Star Wars, and he wasn't available. And then the original Millennium Falcon, they had to change the design of the Falcon because the Falcon looks so much like the eagle, the original. Yeah. So those are all stories we're going to tell. It's going to be really surprising. We're going to talk about the merchandising, all this stuff. It's going to be really surprising, I think. So, well,
you've got some great, obviously, the cast members, participating with you. How receptive were they to being a part of this? Did anyone not want to?
I haven't run into, as far as the people that I wanted for this, all wanted to do it. It was a no-brainer. They were all like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." You know what I mean? But I think the pitch was been good, and they see the quality of what I'm doing. I mean, you saw the trailer that we did, and the whole point of me I was trying to show in that trailer, because we did new visual effects shots of the eagle, and by the way, which was I can't tell you guys how nervous I was having Brian Johnson see my effects shots of the eagle. But he loved them and he approved them. So that was it was like, oh my gosh, but he saw them and he liked them. So that was cool. But it's been really, really positive so far, as far as like pretty much everyone I've wanted for the documentaries agreed to do it. And I think it's, but I've tried to put a good foot forward. Does that make sense? I've tried to say, it's like, hey, I'm not playing around. This is not some little fan thing. We're really trying to make something real and professional. All of our shoots are 2 cameras, motion picture quality. I have a partnership with a company called 0.0 out of New York. They did Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain and some other really amazing shows. They've won tons of Emmys. They're going to be doing the sales process with this. I already have a possibility of getting this into 12,000 theaters in North America.
Oh wow!
So it's like, so this is real. This is like a real movie. I'm making a real I'm trying to use visual effects, LED volume, all kinds of stuff here, so.
Yeah. Well, the website and the trailer looks that way. So again, I'm really excited to see it.
Thank you.
When you went back, to look at the series again and do the research on the show, did you learn anything new that you hadn't known before?
I've learned a lot about how they did the effects, right? It's like like they were trashing those eagles. I mean, they had a big 44-inch one that was made out of like metal, like steel, right? But they were crashing it, and they had to keep rebuilding it, and they had, it was very, very difficult. It's not like they had CG, right? They were yeah, and they didn't even have motion control cameras yet, like they used on Star Wars. They didn't, this was a lot of the effect shots. They were pushing the camera physically past the model, or the models were on wires and they were flying them around and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was like a more advanced version of what they were doing with the marionation stuff, right? It's like, if you think about it, like, what they were doing with Thunderbirds and stuff, it evolved through UFO, then Space 1999. It's almost like Space 1999 was like the ultimate version. Before Star Wars, 1999, I think, is about as good as those kind of effects could get. As far as what they were doing on a, it was the most expensive TV show of the time at the time it was made, so yeah. So it's been interesting going into the archives and, learning about this, and learning that, like, there really isn't one quintessential eagle, because they kept redesigning it and rebuilding it. So as you watch the show, it changes. I mean, it's the same shape, right? It's the same basic thing. But like, if you go, there are these guys who like really know their eagles, man. and I have a friend that works with NASA a lot, and he calls like these people, he calls them rivet counters. Because it's in other words, if someone's recreating something in a film or something like that, you got these guys going, no, that's not right. They only used 10 rivets there, and there should have been 14. It's that kind of thing.
I believe that.
Yeah. I've run into those kind of guys already. They're like, your eagle's not the exact eagle because the windows are like. I'm like, guys, please. Let me just make the movie. So. Yeah.
So. We spoke to Nick Tate recently also, and he mentioned something that's also been written about quite a bit. He clearly had no love for Fred Freiberger.
Oh, gosh.
So who took over the show the second season. So during the documentary, did you find that to be the consensus feeling? And just as a fan for you, did you feel there was like a different tone when he took over?
Oh, gosh, no, it's a different show.
Yeah.
It's like the second season. It's like, wait, I remember, when it came back, I was excited for it to come back as a kid. And the second season came on, and I was like, wait, what is this? The music's different. The interiors are different. The costumes are different. Half the characters that I loved are gone, and then they've added stupid monsters every week. And it was like, what am I watching? And I have to tell you, if I'm really honest with you, it didn't hold my attention the whole season. I didn't watch the whole second season as a child. Even I couldn't get into it. It just didn't work. And the other thing too is like, Fred Freiberger, it's not like Star Trek's Greatest Hour when he took over. He did the third season. It's like, I always joke, it's like, why would you go and say, hey, that guy that kind of ruined Star Trek, let's bring him over here and have him ruin Space 1999. It's just, I don't know. So it was, I completely understood. And when Nick told me how bad it was with Fred, some of the things, the stories he told, like, no one's even going to notice. We're going to get rid of those characters. No one's even going to notice. It's like, wow, it was amazing. It was amazing. Kind of reminds me of some of my Hollywood meetings I've had. So, yeah. So.
Well, do you have any mementos from the show in your collection?
Actual things from the actual show itself. I don't have everything's recreations. I would assume during the course of this I may acquire something, and everything, but it's real stuff from 50 years ago from that show. It's pretty hard to come by,
I would think so. And that's stuff so rarely lives, unless someone is going to caretake it, but
you still have this.
Oh,
that's a awesome memento for my life, going back, but
one of the things that surprised me doing research is that, and I don't know why it did surprise me actually, but Star Trek fans weren't quick to embrace the show. What do you think that is?
Because I think the feeling is that it was a ripoff in a way. I think, and I look, I could imagine someone saying it basically felt like someone said, "Hey, how do we do a mashup of 2001 and Star Trek?" That's what it kind of feels like. I don't think that's inaccurate, right? It's like, hey, what if we had the space state, the moon base from 2001, but we traveled around the universe like they do in Star Trek? That's what it felt like. And like, how do we make that happen? So and I think there were a lot of fans that was like offensive to them, the Star Trek fans. And you have to think about also the time that people who love Star Trek wanted more Star Trek. They didn't want more, they didn't want some other thing that was kind of a Star Trek ripoff. They wanted Star Trek, and everything. And so, once the motion picture came out, and then especially cemented with Star Trek 2, which Ike, you're familiar with.
Yeah, a little bit.
So yeah. What was your big, I want to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
What was your biggest experience or memory, like in terms of what you were doing before doing Star Trek 2, would you say? What was?
Oh, good grief. I'm one of those people blessed with a really, really excellent memory. And I remember everything I've ever done in vivid detail. I mean, for me personally, Escape to Witch Mountain was massively impactful. It was my first movie and such a large role. And see, the thing for me was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into show business was because I was fascinated by special effects. I just, ever since 2001 and watching Thunderbirds and seeing Space 19. I mean, of course, I was already working by the time Space 1999 came out, but all the science fiction shows and all the stuff, all the magic, it was like, I knew it all had to be done by hand somehow. And I wanted to be a part of that. I want to know how it was done. So getting to do Escape to Witch Mountain and participate in all the practical effects that we did, it was just like so absolutely amazing. And so that was a very big deal for me. But to even talk about Star Trek 2 just for a second, because as much as I dreamt of being part of Disney, I wanted to be part of Star Trek somehow. I just did. This was just something that I wanted. And of course, I'm a big fan of Star Trek the motion picture. I liked it. I
love it. I
couldn't get enough of it. It was just it was alien spaceship porn out the wazoo. And I was just like, you can keep showing me as much of this as you want. I was absolutely enthralled.
You and I are
we're like on the total same wavelength with this stuff.
I felt like, just real quick, don't you feel like 2001 and it almost felt like if 2001 is 2001, Star Trek the motion picture is almost like same universe in a way. Almost, it felt like, you know what I mean, like the I don't know how to describe it. It felt like Star Trek became 2001 or something in a way.
I think that's what the fans hated about it. But
but I loved that.
I loved about it because
I actually liked the pace of the film. I actually liked the beauty. Like, to me, it was so artistic and beautiful, the experience. And it literally, I'm even moved just talking about it. I cannot tell you how much Star Trek the motion picture impacted me. And I often say I used to say it was the best movie. I've decided after watching Star Trek 2, some of the re-releases recently of it in the theater, I have acquiesced that it's the best Star Trek film, but I'm always going to say my favorite is the motion picture.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I really
no, not at all. Not at all.
I just had to share that with you.
But just quickly, when after the motion picture, like, it did okay. It did well financially, but the fans hated it, and it was like I just thought, wow, I guess this is it. We're never going to see any more Star Treks because this just didn't go over so well. And then when I got the audition, when I heard about Star Trek 2 in the trades, I was like, oh my God, I was so excited. And then I got an audition for it. And I went, no way. And then I got the part, and I thought, holy cow, I'm going to be in a Star Trek movie. And even as small as my part was, I didn't care. But the thing that was most overwhelming other than seeing the cast, because of course I grew up with them, and then meeting them and chatting with them and all of that was amazing. But when you walk onto the set of the bridge,
yeah,
and they, I don't know how complete, I'm sure the motion picture set was also complete, but it is a fully enclosed space. Okay.
Right.
The ceiling is obviously open because for lighting, but the massive structure of the outside, the wooden, the wooden supports and all the electrical wires coming out from everywhere. You don't even, you think you're walking into some supercomputer somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you go inside and they close that, they swing that one section closed, and we're all in there. And I thought, I'm on the bridge of the freaking Enterprise. I can't believe this. I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking and overwhelming. So I don't know that I actually answered your question. I kind of bounced around there, but the special effects and the creation of all that stuff, because to me, movie magic really is magic. I mean, it's magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I love about it. And I've always loved that about it. And, even when you're doing non-necessarily science fiction or fantasy projects, you're still dealing with a lot of movie magic all the time to make things seem real and work and all of that. So, those are the things that stand out to me the most.
I have to share one thing with you. A high point for me, and I'm being 100% honest with you, when I first saw Star Trek II in the theater, and you popped up in engineering during the inspection, I was like, it's the dude from Witch Mountain. That's what.
Oh, that's great.
I was like, that's awesome. It's the Witch Mountain guy. He's so cool. So I just want you to know. And then, and then it was like, when you kind of backtalked, Kirk, I was like, that's awesome. Not only is he on there, he actually's got like an attitude, and he's like, dude, so it was really cool. I just want you to know,
it was so much fun to do. I got
it really did stand out, and it was a big deal. So just wanted you to know
thank you very much for that.
As a fan. That's great.
Okay, we have to ask this question, another unfair one, maybe. What's your favorite Space 1999 episode?
The Black Sun, which is one where they pass through a black hole in the episode. And there's something about that story, and it's very character driven episode, and there's a lot of great performances in that episode, because they basically think they're going to face a certain death, and because they think they're facing certain death, their emotions become very, very they're very open, and they're very honest about who they, how they feel. It's really, there's some great, especially Barry Morris, who played Professor Bergman, who was my favorite character in the show. He has just, I think, some of the most wonderful moments in the series in that episode. So the Black Sun would be my favorite.
We do want to ask about some of your other projects, but beforehand, when can we expect to see the Eagle has landed documentary, and where? So it's going to be all over?
Well, okay, so we still have principal photography on this thing that's going to be going all the way through January, and then I have a very, very big celebrity musician who has expressed interest in being in the documentary. I don't want to say who his name is.
I'm going to ask, rhymes with?
Let's just put it this way. He's a guitarist, and he's an astrophysicist. I'll put it that way. I will say that. I'm hoping to entice him to be, he likes the project. He's just been on tour. Okay. And so if I can get him sometime in first quarter, that'll be the last bit of production for the project, and everything. So
possible sometime next year?
Yeah. So that my goal is to have it edited and completed by June. And so then our target is to have the film debut at TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival. And that'd be next September. And then You know, we're in talks to bring this thing to, the target is like Apple or Netflix or somewhere like that is like the final home for it, but we're looking at a theatrical run for it first. And I just had some conversations about that in the last 24 hours. So
Oh, wow. Oh, fantastic.
yeah.
Well,
So I mean, for sure, it would be, you know, it'll be debuting by next fall, but I expect it to be in distribution by, you know, 2025, the 50th anniversary of 1999. So,
oh, that'll be great.
yeah.
Well, want to ask you about another project you're involved with, Persephone, your movie and book. But let's talk about the movie first. All right. So what can you tell us about it, and where did that idea come from?
The idea came from, you know, I've always been fascinated with the concept of the Alpha Centauri system, the idea that, you know, what's the nearest star system to our own, right? And the idea that it's 4 light years away. Now, 4 light years away with our current rocket technology would still be 150,000 years to get there. But that's still, you know, in astronomical terms, like right in the backyard, right? So it seems like a fascinating place. The idea that, and there's 3 stars there, and 2 of them are kind of similar to our sun, and then there's a third, Proxima, which orbits the other 2, which is a red dwarf star. And in 2016, astronomers discovered a planet orbiting Proxima, which is the nearest star to us. And that planet actually orbits in what would be considered the Goldilocks zone of that star. So in other words, a place where liquid water and potentially conditions for life could exist. And when I heard that, I'm like, okay, so there's literally a planet, and it's literally in the Goldilocks zone of the nearest star. I'm like, that's really, really interesting, right? And so I was out walking my dog. I lived in Scottsdale at that time in Arizona, and I was walking my dog out in the desert, and I started thinking about, you know, I want to tell a story about this planet. Like, what would it be like to get there and go there? And what if you got there and there was something that you didn't expect that kind of puts us as the, you know, what if we were the invaders? What if we were the aliens? What if we were the problem? What if we were the thing to be afraid of? What you know? And I started thinking about a sort of almost a morality play to talk about, you know, because this is going to be a real thing. When human beings start moving out into the solar system or into the galaxy, we are going to encounter things that we may not even identify as life. And suddenly we'll be like, oh, wait, you mean that was alive? You mean that thing we just destroyed? Oh, shoot. You know what I mean, right? Yeah, that was actually a life form. Oh, I thought that was a rock, you know, right? That was kind of the impetus for me creating Persephone as a story. That's what I would say. And I wanted to tell a story like that. If I can, one last bit was, I thought it would be interesting if you had a ship that took decades to get there, and you had some colonists who were in hibernation, and then you had people who were born on the ship. Well, you think about it, if you were born on a ship, you'd never been to Earth. So you'd have a completely different perspective, and your entire future would be going to that planet, right? And then I thought, what if you had a conflict suddenly occur between somebody who's from Earth versus someone who's never been to Earth, and they have different perspectives? So that was another big part of telling the story for me. Those are kind of the 2 big, you know, touch points. So.
Oh God, that is absolutely fascinating. And we've seen that you have a Kickstarter campaign for that, and we've seen quite a few films now that go that route. I was even in a documentary that was funded that way, a series of them, really amazing ones. It's a whole new way to finance films these days. Now, how difficult is that to do, and what does it entail?
Well, so we actually launched a Kickstarter originally for The Eagles Landed, but I wanted to be honest, because sometimes people go on Kickstarter and they actually put numbers that are lower with the goal of getting their number, right? The problem with that is that you have to deliver the product.
Yeah.
You know, right? And so if I gone on Kickstarter and said, I can make this whole film for $50,000, it just wouldn't have been true, you know, and right. And then you're also agreeing to provide rewards for people who are funding you, right? You have to provide rewards. And I do know some folks who've gotten into a position where they almost became, their job became more about fulfilling the rewards than it was about making the actual project they were trying to create. So there's a real balance you have to strike between the thing you want to make in finance, right? And being on that platform, it's very, very difficult. And so I set our number high, which was a realistic number to make the documentary. Now what happened is we raised about 140,000, which in Kickstarter land, they've had over 80,000 projects, and ours way less than 1% have ever raised 100,000. So, so the good news was it proved that we have an audience, it proved that we have interest, and it got attention. So I was able to use that, even though we didn't finish the Kickstarter. I just kind of, at a certain point, was like, we're not going to hit 500,000. But you know what? People love this. I'm going to use this. And I packaged that information, and I was able to start raising private equity to get it going, which is great. Which awesome. Worked out really well. So that's how that worked. But as far as the novel goes, for Persephone, we had a much more realistic lower target. So we hit it within like an hour, the target. And so now we've like gone like 7 times the amount of funding we were looking for that book. And then, so I co-authored it. So Kevin Anderson took my screenplay for Persephone and he turned it into a novel. He turned it into a novelization, which was really cool. So yeah, and it's a huge honor for me to work with him, because Kevin, I'm a big fan of Dune. And especially, it's funny, I like the Frank Herbert original Dune book, but the books that I really even got into more were these prequel books that were made. And Kevin Anderson and Frank Herbert's son, Brian, wrote those books. Mm-hmm. So I'd been reading Kevin Anderson books for decades. And then he and I met, and he and I hit it off, man. We were just like brothers, and so then he worked with me some on the screenplay. At this point, the screenplay's changed so much, though, because I've had to rewrite it so many times. But the version of the screenplay that he and I worked on a lot, we took that one and turned it into a book. So it's pretty cool. And
that's how he became, because he's written, besides Dune, he's done X-Files, Star Wars, like, and all that.
Yeah, he's written so many different things, so many different places.
So how did he become involved in the film, though? At some point, how you just said, like, I'd like you to become involved with this, and you just
I think Kevin's always had aspirations to bring. I mean, he's got projects that could become great movies. It's just, and you pitch them around Hollywood and try to pull it off. And even if you're a really successful author, it doesn't mean you can make it happen. I mean, we could do a whole podcast about Hollywood. It's a real challenge. It's a super challenging industry. And it's not just about having a good product that gets it made. It's relationships and all the different things. So
the book industry is the same, by the way.
Yes, Kevin's told me that, actually. Yes. Yeah. So that's part of why Kevin started doing Kickstarters, for his books, right. Yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey. So anyway, the book is going to be great. I'm going to be reading the audiobook version of it, which will be fun. That'll be out next year. As far as the feature goes, right now I currently have Isai Morales, Ming-Na Wen, and Brianna Hildebrand attached to star in the film. We've had a lot of ups and downs due to COVID. We were really close to launching, and then it fell apart. And then we've been regrouping and figuring it out. So we're still figuring out kind of the final destination of the project and everything, but there's so much cool stuff I'd love to show you guys. I've done thousands of storyboards and tons of production design, and I think you guys will really like what you're going to see when you see this film. It's my 2001. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
it's got more action and adventure to it than 2001, right? It's more of an audience pleaser, but it's definitely got the spaceship porn. It's got the it's got the stuff that guys like us like. It's gonna be great.
When that comes out, I'd love to have you back to discuss that movie, actually.
Yeah, love to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
So that'll be next year that's released, you think?
What I'm hoping is that we'll be into actual production on that film by next fall. That's my, so I'm gonna get Eagles Landed done. I'm working on the deals. I actually got approached by some financiers about finalizing Persephone now, and I think that we're getting close. So, it's just a question of, am I going to shoot it? I have a place, I could shoot it in Utah. I could shoot it in Munich. There's some different places, and it all depends on kind of what the best package is to produce it, and everything. So I'm settling all that, figuring, I even a possibility of shooting it in Poland, in Warsaw. So these are all different, things I'm working with as a producer. So
looks like 2024 is going to be a huge year for you.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I've got some other projects too I'm trying to develop. I've got an animated thing called Parallel Man that it's about parallel universes. that I'm developing into a feature with a company called Polygon Pictures out of Tokyo. They do
awesome.
a lot of cool stuff like Star Wars Rebels and things like that. So that's another project. I did a graphic novel a few years back and stuff.
We're going to ask about that too, but
Yeah,
I do want to ask about one person that you've worked with that I've been waiting to ask about. You worked with Malcolm McDowell. How was that?
Oh God, it was really awesome, man. I can't okay, so of all, I mean, he's been one of my favorite actors since I don't even know, going back, right? I was a kid the first time I saw him, and then seeing him, I think it was Time After Time or something, where he played H.G. Wells in that film.
Yep.
And then you know, then seeing him, you know, I guess I saw something like I was older when I saw Clockwork Orange, but you know, seeing him in all these different movies, he always just captivated me. I always was like, my God, what a great actor, right? He was amazing. So when it came along, and I was like, you know, I want to have a really distinctive voice for this, and I want this character to be potentially somebody else in the series if we continue forward. And he agreed to be in it and do it. And so I got to work with him. It was just for one day in Santa. I'm sorry, I was over in Burbank, and I don't know, he came in, we got along really, really well, and I directed him. And the one thing he said to me, I remember he walked out of the studio and he said, "Well, you knew what you wanted." And you know, and I guess for him that was a big compliment. You know, it's like I'm sure working with directors who are like, I don't know, what do you want to do? You know, it's like that's like the last thing they want to hear. I told him exactly what I wanted and he was impressed with that. So it was really fun working with him. I liked him a lot. So yeah.
Well, you know, back to your graphic novels, and you also have your own comics. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah. So I was in the comic business for a little bit. That was actually really early in this company. I was actually targeting doing comics first and then moving into film, right? So the first comic I was going to do, well, I did something called Venus, which is about the first mission to the planet Venus, our neighboring planet. And it was a group of astronauts and AIs, these like artificially intelligent robots, right? And it's a pretty cool story about what it would be like to actually go to Venus with this floating platform that's in the atmosphere. It floats above, because Venus is a horrible place, you know, 900 degrees and, you know, the massive atmosphere and sulfuric acid rain. It's not a place you'd want to hang out. But if you're up at the high, you know, the high altitudes, there's Earth-like conditions. So if you could get a platform there, it could float and do the science, right? So I have these 4 astronauts plus these 4 AIs, and the AIs are considered to be sentient. And there ends up being some really interesting, weird things that happen between the AIs and the humans. So that's a story. So I did that one back in 2012. And I have a screenplay for that I'd love to make into a film. I've already done all the design work.
We're going to ask that if you were going to aim to do any of them into a movie.
Yeah, I want to make that one. That one's definitely planned to be a movie. There's no question that will be a film. I will be making that. There, you know, I did another thing called Brainstorm, which was about an experiment to control weather, which ends up creating this sentient storm that starts moving across the country, destroying the country. This guy, the guy who designs the system, he uses a map of his neural network to create this weather control thing, and the weather control thing starts to go crazy. And it turns out it's because he has all these personal demons, and it's reflecting his personal demons. So he's got to face his own demons, and that stops the storm. It's kind of it was like a 6-issue miniseries we did called Brainstorm. And it won some awards. People liked it. And then I did Parallel Man, which was a 7-issue series, which we collected into a graphic novel. And that was about this kind of a rebellion between this group called the Ascendancy, which is so I started imagining like what would happen if instead of the Manhattan Project creating the atomic bomb, it created portals into a parallel world, and they became controllable, and then the people became corrupt who were behind it. So this version of the United States kind of becomes this very evil empire that starts to, you know, take over different versions of the Earth and other multiverses, right? Other parts of the multiverse. And so then there starts to become a rebellion, and that's what the series is about. So we we did that 7-issue series graphic novel, and then I also did a mobile device game, and we did an animated film with that, which starred John Cho, and which is cool. So
good grief. I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I'm starting to feel like a real lazy brain over here. Well, what else is Future Dude going to be involved with?
I think let's see, the dream for me is I want to kind of become the how do I describe this? It's weird because it's a weird metaphor. When you look at the empire Tyler Perry has created, Tyler Perry has found like the audience that wants his content, right? Yep. So he independently has produced that content and he delivers it. And he's made billions of dollars delivering to this audience that was very underserved. That audience, no one cared about that audience. He got it. He cared about them. He made content. He put it out there, right? In a way, I almost see myself doing a model similarly where I become like a sci-fi Tyler Perry in a way, right? Where I'm doing hard sci-fi stuff. And I have these projects like Venus, like Oceanus, which is about an underwater city. Persephone. I have another one called Saturn V, which is about a group of young people who are traveling in the solar system that's targeted at kids. I want to be known as sort of the Gene Roddenberry, Jerry Anderson kind of guy who's doing this hard sci-fi stuff for the 21st century. That's where I'm going. That's my dream. That's the model. Does that make sense? But I think I'm going to have to do it independently because it's a hard pitch to Hollywood.
Oh, yeah,
it's
for
like
sure.
Right. In Hollywood, it's like, well, because I literally, like, I'll pitch Persephone and I'll have Hollywood groups go, yeah, we looked at that, but it's kind of cerebral, or there's not, you don't have like the major elements. So major elements, they mean like monsters or space battles or lightsabers or these sort of stereotypical tropes of the genre.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that, and I'm not going to. It's not what I'm about. So I'm holding fast that this vision, I can bring it forward. So that's my dream with the Future Dude brand, and to create that and bring it forward. This really cool hard sci-fi thing, and proving to people that movies like The Martian, for example, that could be an entire genre. Not a blip, but a genre. So.
Well, yeah, we have The Eagle Has Landed coming out. I just want to ask, if you could do a documentary on any other show or movie, is there any particular one that stands out in your mind that you would love to tackle?
Any other show or movie? That's really interesting, man. No one's ever asked me that question. That's a really interesting one. My gosh, I don't know that I can answer that. I don't know if I can answer that quickly. Any other show or movie to do a documentary on it? Man, that's a really hard one. That's a really, really hard question. Yeah, I'm gonna have to pass. I don't think I can.
Hey, we stumped the guest.
Yeah. Look, there is something coming that I'm part of that's about a certain film where but we can't talk about that right now. So, there might be other documentaries out there coming.
So when we have you back, we expect a lot more answers.
Yes, let's look at it that way.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe within the next few months I can answer that question.
Okay. Well, we look forward to that.
There you go. Yeah.
How can fans follow you on social media?
The best bet, obviously futuredude.com is a great place to look at all this. The eagledocumentary.com is the site for the Eagle. And on that page, it's really been fun because I wanted to create a website. I really worked hard with my web team on that because there are so many stories I'm coming across of people who are like, oh man, I grew up, I love that. I'm like, send us your story, send us photos, tell us your story. So there's a whole section in that site that where we tell the stories of fans. You can see their fan story growing up. It's very interesting. So we really encourage people to take that, and we're actually doing a production log of making the documentary on there and everything. So eagledocumentary.com, futuredude.com. You can learn about all the stuff we're doing. We're on Real Future Dude on X and on Facebook, and I think we have social media links on each one of those pages too. So yeah. Instagram.
Jeffrey, it's been so much fun talking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had so much fun with you.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And again, anytime, you're welcome back.
Hey guys, it's a real honor. I am so excited by what you're doing. The fact that you're talking about these things and keeping all this alive, it's fantastic. And it's just, again, it's a huge honor to be here and meet you. You know, Ike, I can't wait to talk to you more, man, about motion picture and stuff like that. So cool. Yeah.
Escape to Witch Mountain documentary.
Yeah, no, that could be one. Like I said, you threw me for a loop. I got to think about that one. When I come back, we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenmann. And again, a very special thanks to Jeffrey Mars. And watch the documentary and please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.